Wednesday's quarterfinal round may have been the best quarterfinals in the history of the men's Olympic ice hockey tournament. In fact, it may have been the most entertaining slate of games in a single day from start to finish in the history of the men's Olympic hockey tournament.
You're listening to the PuckUps podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian D. Felice.
Welcome into episode 12 of the PuckUps podcast. I am Brian D. Felice, and thank you all for joining me. On today's show, we're going to recap what very well may have been the best ever quarterfinal round in the men's Olympic ice hockey tournament's history. And in doing so, preview the upcoming semifinal matchups. I had mentioned on the last episode this narrative going around comparing the Four Nations face-off to the Olympics. The argument was that the Four Nations face-off was much better, much more entertaining, and we'll stop the conversation right there for a second. I agree that the Four Nations face-off tournament was electric. The entertainment, the intensity, the animosity, and the quality of play was through the roof. However, comparing the Four Nations face-off to group play at the Olympics, to me, was a bit premature and inappropriate because the Olympics aren't over yet. Now, the knockout rounds for the Olympics have gotten underway, and the tournament has taken on a much different tone. And as I said off the top, Wednesday's quarterfinal round may have been the best quarterfinals in the history of the men's Olympic ice hockey tournament. In fact, it may have been the most entertaining slate of games in a single day from start to finish in the history of the men's Olympic hockey tournament. Now, I can't speak to all of the Olympics of the past, but I think it would be, there's individual games throughout the history of the Olympics that probably top some of the games we've seen today, no doubt about it. But in terms of top to bottom entertainment, you would be hard pressed to find a single day where the hockey was as entertaining with the stakes as high as we saw on Wednesday. Now, of course, we'll start off with the first game of quarterfinal action, which was the least entertaining of the four, and that was Slovakia defeating Germany 6-2. And the Slovakians have been an outstanding story in this tournament so far. They have definitely turned a lot of heads, and they're playing great hockey. They started off the tournament in dramatic fashion, upsetting Team Finland, who, by the way, has moved on to the semifinals as well as Slovakia, though they'll be playing the Canadians. But Slovakia has earned people's respect out the gate. I talked about on the Olympics preview episode how on paper, at least, it seemed as though Slovakia had taken a step back from their teams of the 90s and 2000s, where they boasted 10, 12, 13, 14 NHL all-stars on their rosters in any given international tournament. And their roster this year has Juraj Slafkovský, who is absolutely a young NHL star. And they have some decent NHL players supporting him, but their roster is maybe a quarter full of NHL talent. And I didn't expect much of them compared to the Finlands of the world, the Swedens, the Czechias, the United States, and certainly Canada. So hats off to Slovakia in this tournament. They have been really, truly outstanding, and they have been the Cinderella story of a tournament where people have just expected U.S. versus Canada in the gold medal game all along, barring any upsets from Sweden or Czechia or Finland. So Slovakia earned their right to the quarterfinals by way of bye after securing the Group B win. And they did so, again, on the backs of just some hard-nosed, intense hockey. They know what their style of play wants to be, and they go out and they execute. And against Germany, again, Germany has some of the best talent in the world on their roster in terms of their top players, right? Leon Draisaitl, Tim Stützle, Mo Seider, JJ Peterka. I mean, those guys are Seider and Draisaitl in particular, and Stützle. They're three of the top probably 20, 25 players in the NHL overall. So, and then JJ Peterka is just a real solid, top line winger. Nico Sturm is a good player as well, and some others, right? So Germany, they had some talent, and they have more high end talent than Slovakia, that's for sure. But the Slovaks just went out there and took care of business from start to finish. I think they had a 4-0 lead at one point, and the game was over before it started. So they move on to the semifinals where they'll take on the Americans, who we'll get to that game in just a little bit. Moving along to Finland and Switzerland. So this game took place between the Canada and Czechia game and the US and Sweden game. But I'm going to go to this one first because there's a little bit more meat to the storylines from the other two. But this game, again, hats off to Switzerland. They are similar to Slovakia, similar to Germany, similar to Czechia. Like they have some NHL players and some elite ones at that, but they don't have a roster full of NHL talent. Now, the Swiss have Roman Josi and Nico Hischier and Timo Meyer. They have JJ Moser. They have Kevin Fiala, who obviously suffered a long-term injury in the game against the Canadians where Tom Wilson and he got tangled up and fell to the ice. Kevin Fiala is out for the remainder of the Los Angeles Kings regular season, let alone the rest of the Olympic Games. So they had to deal with that personnel loss. But Switzerland as a team, they were impressive. They really were. All tournament, they're fast, they're tenacious, they seemed well coached. Coaching for a lot of these European teams has been a bit of a question mark in terms of how they're handling their NHL stars. But Switzerland just seems like a team, a program that is used to playing with one another, and they had some good chemistry. So they had a really good showing, and they were up 2-0 in this game on Team Finland for the majority of the game. It took a Sebastian Aho goal in the dying minutes of the third period. I want to say under 5 minutes to go in regulation to cut the lead to 2-1, and then it was Miro Heiskanen who scored with the goalie pulled for Finland. So listen, Finland, US, Canada, all those teams had their backs against the wall on the verge of being upset in the quarterfinal action. And it was looking bleak for Team Finland. It really was. The Finns were, again, it's been an interesting calendar year for Team Finland. They didn't have a great showing at the Four Nations face-off. Obviously, they were without Miro Heiskanen in that tournament. And here in the Olympics, they are without Sasha Barkov. So they get Heiskanen back for the Olympics, but they lose Barkov, who would be their top center and top player, really, overall. So they start the tournament with a loss to Slovakia, as I mentioned a few moments ago, and they were able to bounce back with a win over Sweden, an emphatic win over the Italians, and then in qualification play, they were able to actually they were able to get a bye to the quarters because while they didn't win Group B, they were the 4th overall seed. So they bounced back well enough following their loss to Slovakia in the opening group stage play to get themselves a bye to the quarters. But in the quarters, their backs were against the wall, down 2-0, and they had a good second period, but it just kind of felt like the Swiss were just going to find a way to hold on for that win. And in credit to Finland, they tied the game late on Heiskanen's goal, and then Arturi Lehkonen with the overtime winner off a pass from Anton Lundell. 3-on-3 action these overtime games were for the quarterfinal rounds. I also think for the semifinals, if it goes to overtime, it'll be 3-on-3, but I think the gold medal game will be 5-on-5 overtime if necessary. So the Finns were able to find a way to hang in there long enough, get the game to overtime, and then let their speed and skill take over and propel them to the quarterfinals, where they will have a date with the Canadians. Now, Team Canada, oh boy, this was, as I said, this game took place just before the Finland and Switzerland game. So we knew that Canada had already advanced by the time Finland and Swiss were playing. But wow, what this Canadian Czechia game may have been, it's been the game of the tournament so far. It's one of the best international games that I can remember in quite some time, in terms of best on best, just because of the stakes and the drama and the back and forth nature of it. And Czechia, they played Canada earlier on in group stage. They got outworked, outclassed, outskated, and out executed. But as the tournament's gone on, I think some of Czechia's top players have started to, round out into form. And David Pastrnak in particular, he hadn't had a great tournament. He had some moments in group play, in the qualification round, where he had some production on some key goals, but he just didn't seem like he was driving play like he does at the NHL level in Boston. And, in the opening game against Canada, that was understandable because of, it's the first game of the tournament for them. Everybody's getting their feet wet, and perhaps he was just overwhelmed with the depth of Team Canada, where Pastrnak and some of his line mates were just kind of, they were, like I said, maybe they're just getting fatigued and not worked. But in this game in particular, Pastrnak was excellent. I thought Marty Necas was excellent. I thought Radko Gudas was excellent. But the Czechs, Andre Palat was very good. I just thought that everybody on Czechia came to play. They really had a great game. And, Macklin Celebrini gets Canada on the board first, 1-0 earlier in the game. But the Czechs tie it, and then they take the lead on a David Pastrnak power play goal. Just an all-world finish by Pastrnak on a pass from Philip Ronak. And all of a sudden, Team Canada is looking at the scoreboard and they're down a goal. And Czechia is playing stingy. They're playing physical. Canada's getting their shots, but a lot of them were from the outside, or they just weren't. Czechia they weren't giving them a lot of space. And Sidney Crosby goes down with an injury. Radko Gudas laid the body on Crosby, and he left the game. We're unsure as of recording right now what his status is going forward. I think he's getting checked out, a possible MRI. So we'll see what happens there. So the Canadians had to play the rest of the game without Sidney Crosby, and they're already down 2-1 on the scoreboard. And, anytime you go into a game and you're a heavy favorite, when you're on the other side of the score, the other end of the score, you start to play tight, you start to get nervous, and you start to get off your game a little bit. And the later that game went, it just felt like it was going to favor Czechia because, well, Canada's supposed to be winning this game by 3-4 goals, and they're down a goal. And, they were able to finally tie the game in the second period on a power play goal of their own, Nathan McKinnon. But then it's Andre Palat with, I want to say, 5 minutes to go in the third period or about that. And he puts the Czechs back on top late in regulation, and on a crazy play, because as it turns out, apparently there were 6 guys on the ice for Czechia. And so had that score held, that would have been quite the controversy and a hell of a way to go out for Team Canada, getting eliminated from the Olympics when they're the heavy favorites because the refs missed a blatant 6 guys on the ice. I mean, it was blatant. It was tough to see in real time because I didn't see many replays, but after the fact, you saw some screenshots, and Czechia straight up just had 6 guys in the defensive zone. And, there was a blocked shot that went the other way. And next thing you know, Necas to Andre Palat in transition, and it's 3-2 Czechia. So in the moment, it felt like Czechia got a goal that was, fair play. But as it turns out, they had an extra guy on the ice. So that would have been brutal for Canadians to stomach, especially with the benefit of replay. And you just couldn't help but think that this would be, it wouldn't quite be the Americans versus Soviets in 1980, but you couldn't help but think that this would be one of the greatest upsets in the history of Olympic hockey if Czechia were able to knock out the Canadians, not only in general, but in the quarterfinals, for that Canadian roster to not advance past the quarterfinals would have been uh, the shock of all shocks. And as history will tell us now, they did indeed find a way to tie the game on a beautiful tip by Nick Suzuki, and forces the game into overtime late in regulation, where about a minute and a half into the 3-on-3 session, Mitch Marner, who's a very, very polarizing player for Canadian fans, as well as just fans of hockey in general, right? I mean, Mitch Marner for years, as as productive as he was in Toronto, it just never really seemed like he was a player that the fans got behind in big moments, and maybe he did leave stuff to be desired um, for the Toronto Maple Leafs in big games, but when he's wearing the red and white Maple Leaf, he's been clutch. I mean, he had a overtime winner in the Four Nations tournament against Sweden in game one. He set up Connor McDavid for the overtime winner in a championship game against Team USA. And his most recent success story is winning the game in overtime against Czechia in the quarterfinals of the Olympics. And he helps propel the Canadians to the semifinals, where they will now take on Team Finland. So, it wouldn't have felt right as a hockey fan who wants to see the absolute best in the gold medal game. It just wouldn't have felt right if the Canadians lost, and it wouldn't have felt right if the Americans lost in these quarterfinal overtime games. I mean, if they did, it is what it is. Like, you lose, right? If you lose, are you the best? I mean, in a 7-game series, do I think Czechia would beat Canada or Sweden would beat the USA? No, but that's the beauty of these 1-game elimination tournaments. It's similar to the NFL in that sense, right? In Major League Baseball, you have series. In the NBA, you have series. The NHL, you have series. In the NFL, you got to bring your best in a 1-game scenario throughout the playoffs, and we kind of get that element in the Olympics for hockey, where hey, if you play a team 7 times, maybe you win 4 of them, but you don't have that luxury. You have to show up when it matters in a 1-game scenario. So the Canadians, they dodge a major bullet, and you can't help but feel very proud of Czechia. All of these teams, really. I mean, even Italy and France, those teams had no prayer of advancing to the medal rounds, but they worked their asses off in group stage. I thought Denmark played really hard. I thought Germany, for the most part, I thought they played really hard. I thought that Slovakia obviously has been a great story. Latvia didn't make it past group stage, but they were stingy as hell. So Czechia, right? Like Czechia just on short rest, right? Having played the day before, they don't have Pavel Zacha, who would have been their top center, or certainly in their top 6. They don't have Philip Hedel. They were down some bodies. Now injuries happen, right? I mean, the Swedes don't have Leo Carlson in this tournament at all. The Finns don't have Sasha Barkov, as I mentioned, right? So there are some big injuries throughout the Olympics for some teams, and as I mentioned, Canada lost Sidney Crosby halfway through the game against Czechia. But again, still, just Czechia gave Canada all that they could handle, and hats off to Czechia. They have nothing to be ashamed of. And on the flip side of it, the Canadians, as I said, bullet dodge. But hey, this was their first time being tested like this in this tournament. So if you're a Canadian fan or player or coach, you look at that game now with the benefit of hindsight, and you say, hey, you know what? Now that we know we won, that was probably a good thing for us to experience, because now, if we, after dominating group play, now if we get behind the Finns in the semifinals, and even if we're down late to the Finns, we know we've been there before. If we beat the Finns and we play the Americans or the Slovakians, and we're down at any point in the gold medal game, or we're not playing our best, we know that we're capable of coming back because we've now done it. So, and I think that sentiment stands true for the Finns too, right? They're down 2-0 to Switzerland, and their backs are against the wall, and they had to find a way to win. Same for the Americans, right? The Americans didn't face much adversity in group play. They faced some early on against Latvia when they had 2 goals wiped off the scoreboard in the first period. They had some against Denmark when Jeremy Swayman let in a couple of early goals that he probably wish he had back. But they really faced adversity against Sweden when they relinquished a 1-0 lead late in regulation and had to end up winning it in overtime where everybody's holding their breath. So all of these teams that have advanced, maybe outside of Slovakia, but I mean, hey, they lost to Sweden in a game, so in group play. So, they've faced adversity. And as an underdog in general, I think their adversity is their roster, right? I mean, Finland, US, and Canada, all NHL players. I think Finland has one NHL player or one player who's not from the NHL on their roster. And so Slovakia, their adversity is their roster on paper compared to these behemoths in the US and Canada in particular, and in Finland as well. So, yeah, I mean, but moving on to the US Sweden game, I thought this game was a bit of a feeling out process early on for the Americans and for the Swedes. But again, the Swedes played yesterday. So my fear heading into this game for the United States was they've only played 15 NHL rostered players over the course of their entire group stage. There were only 15 or 16 NHL players between the German, Latvian, and Danish rosters combined. So, as I said, they didn't face a ton of adversity in group stage, and you could tell that they were still trying to find their game. So, having a couple of days off, you haven't really been tested much in group play. You haven't played a roster full of NHL players. Now you need to go play Sweden, who their entire roster is NHL players, and most of them are NHL All-Stars on their respective teams. So my fear was that, I don't know, I just didn't know if the Americans had the rev of their engine where it needed to be heading into this game. And I was concerned that, hey, if you aren't ready to go off at puck drop because you're not used to the speed and skill of a full NHL lineup at the Olympics so far, and Sweden gets off to an early lead, well, now you're going to start to feel pressure, similar to how Canada felt against Czechia. And now you're going to start to grip your stick a little bit too tight and make plays that, maybe aren't the smartest, and you start to cheat the game a little bit because you're trying to jump the gun for offense. And so, fortunately for the Americans, that didn't happen. Again, the first period was a bit of a feeling out process, but they were able to get the 1-0 lead on a beautiful tip in by Dylan Larkin. Larkin starts the play with a great face-off win to the right of Jacob Markstrom, and it goes back to Quinn Hughes, who passed it to his brother Jack, who went out high on the rotation at the top of the blue line, and he had a nice one-timer tippable shot. It was a shot for a tip that was low enough for Larkin to redirect and give the U.S. the 1-0 lead, and that score held. I thought that Sweden had their pockets of time in this game where they were controlling play and dictating play. I thought it was a pretty evenly played game. For the most part, I do think the edge went to the Americans for sure. I mean, they had more shots. I do think the Americans had more grade A chances and whatnot, but I thought Sweden played well. And you could start to see them coming along in the third period. I thought the Americans were the better team in the second. I thought the first period was kind of a wash. And I just thought that Sweden started to put on a push, when they realized that they really had to score, or else their tournament was over. So, lo and behold, Mason Raymond, who had a fantastic tournament for the Swedes, found Mika Zibanejad for a beautiful one-timer finish off the post and in to beat Connor Hellebuyck, who I think has been really, really good for the Americans. He has been as advertised. I know there were some questions about him, but he was really good in Four Nations. If you actually look at his numbers in the Four Nations tournament, Connor Hellebuyck was very good in that tournament. He was beat, on a shot in the slot by Connor McDavid in overtime. So he doesn't have a ton of success in the playoffs with Winnipeg. I think that's why he gets a bit of a rap for not being a clutch goalie. But with the USA jersey on, I mean, he's definitely been a really, really productive goalie for them in terms of save percentage and goals against average. But this one in particular beat him. It was a great shot by Zibanejad, and it ties it 1-1. with about a minute and a half left to go in regulation. And oh boy, you start to think the worst if you're an American fan. You start to say to yourself, wow, here we are now. It feels like the Olympics have barely begun for Team USA. And now they're one goal away against from going home early. And now you may be the laughing stock of the Olympics. You may be the ultimate choke artist in these Olympic Games. And after waiting 12 years for international best on best at the Olympics, and with how far USA hockey has come, the speed and the skill and the talent that the Americans have, for them to go home in a quarterfinal matchup when they had the lead late in the game, that would have been really tough to stomach. And it would be a long, long wait for the next opportunity to see international best on best, which will probably be the 2028 World Cup of Hockey. So fortunately, in overtime, Quinn Hughes didn't leave the ice, and he's, just an absolute game breaker. He's the best defenseman in the world, in my opinion, not named Cale Makar. And I think the gap between the two of them is not very much. So yeah, in games like this, it's oftentimes the team with the biggest playmaker and difference maker, game breaker. That's the difference. And in the case for the Americans, it was Quinn Hughes. And so that now sets up a semifinal round where we have the Americans versus the Slovakians and the Canadians versus the Finns. Now, I'll just say right now that it should be US versus Canada. That's what we're all hoping for outside of Finnish and Slovakian fans. I think the hockey world wants to see the two best teams in the world going at it for a gold medal. It's seemed destined since Four Nations. It seemed destined for a while, right? We've seen the Americans program grow vastly over the last 10 years or so. I mean, at the World Championship level, they won this past spring, which, it was their first time winning World Championships in 94 years. But the NHL players, just when their NHL season ends, a lot of them that would be the best players available to play in these tournaments, they elect to go home and rest, right? They don't value World Championships like a lot of the European nations do. But with the Olympics on the horizon this year, last spring they wanted to partake. A lot of them that were not playing in the NHL playoffs, so they were able to actually send a pretty decent roster, and they won their first World Championship in 94 years. And at the World Junior level, the United States prior to this year had been back-to-back champions, and they've been collecting some gold medals in the last decade plus as well at that level. So USA hockey's come a long way. And to the ultimate test is to play the Canadians for a gold medal, and I expect that. Right? I mean, no disrespect to Slovakia, they've been a fantastic story in these games. They haven't seen a team like the Americans yet, and I don't think that Slovakia is going to catch the Americans off guard. I think that at this point in the tournament, everybody's aware of what Slovakia has done. Everybody's aware that they beat Finland to start the tournament. Everyone's aware that they played Sweden really tough in a 5-3 loss. They're aware of their wins over Italy and Germany to get to this point. So they're not going to catch anybody off guard. And I think the Americans being tested the way that they were against the Swedes. Listen, the Swedes were a really tough draw for the Americans to get in the quarterfinals. I mean, you're the second overall seed in the tournament, and you have to play Sweden in the quarters. Well, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, your likelihood of losing and getting upset is greater against a team like Sweden in the quarters. But on the other side of the aisle, if you can beat them, if you can take care of business and move on, then you're better off for it. You've been tested now, right? It's good that the United States were tested by Sweden in the quarters, because now they should be their game faces should be ready to go when they meet the Slovakians in the semifinals. And as far as the Canadians and the Finns, I think in the same way that the Americans were scared against, or a scare was put into the Americans against Sweden, I think I think Czechia put a big scare into the Canadians in their quarterfinal game. So I think both nations, they're battle tested now. I mean, you can only get so battle tested in a short tournament like this, and somehow they've all managed to be battle tested now, even Finland and Slovakia. But the Canadians and the Americans, their rosters run so deep and they're so talented, that their biggest concern would be, we're so good we won't ever be tested until we actually get slapped in the face, and they've been slapped in the face. So they know they're in a fight now, and I don't think that either opponent is going to catch the Americans or the Canadians off guard in this one. And I just think that the Finns, again, if they had Sasha Barkov, then it's a different story, because you can roll out Barkov and Rantanen and Rupe Hintz and Heiskanen, and they just have so much talent over there for the Finns. But no one's talent runs deeper. No one's speed runs deeper than the Canadians. So I think that, again, both teams will be tested heavily. But I think that the Americans and the Canadians, I would be really shocked, especially with the adversity that they face in the quarterfinals. I would be blown away if we don't get a gold medal game between the Americans and the Canadians, and it will be the marquee of the Winter Olympics. And I can't wait for it. Listen, the Slovakians are a great story. The Finns, they're a great program. Should they advance, good for them. I'll be excited to watch them too. But as a hockey fan outside of Slovakia and Finland, I can't imagine that there's many people who don't want to see two Goliaths go at it for a chance to win Olympic gold. So that'll do it for this episode. If you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcasts. And if you want to get in touch with me or be a part of the show, you can email me, info@thepuckups.com. You can tweet at me on X @BrianDFelice_. You can tweet at the show @thepuckups, or you can call and leave a voicemail to be aired right here on this show by calling 617-539-6958. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk next week.